This is Speaking of Pets podcast, where we offer you up-to-date, science-based, accurate information.
Oh, Gizmo! Good kitty. You're such a good kitty.
And they're looking up and howling in unison.
If it affects pets, we'll talk about it. Today's Speaking of Pets podcast is sponsored by Blue Buffalo, the maker of natural pet foods. Love them like family, feed them like family. Blue Buffalo offers wholesome, meat-first recipes with high-quality natural ingredients in flavors dogs and cats love. Discover formulas for all breed sizes, life stages, and lifestyles. And with Blue Buffalo's True Blue Promise, that assures that real meat is the first ingredient, with no poultry byproducts, no corn, wheat, or soy, and no artificial flavors or preservatives. Hey, Janet, we've been getting a lot of questions from our viewers about pet insurance. So we're so fortunate today to have Dr. Frances Wilkerson, who's a veterinarian and author-creator of the website PetInsuranceUniversity.com. It's a website she established in 2009 dedicated to helping people like us as pet owners navigate the world of pet insurance. And it's from a veterinarian's point of view, which I think is a great idea. A little bit about Dr. Wilkerson. She graduated from vet school, the University of Wisconsin, and then did a one-year internship at Cornell in small animal surgery and medicine. She has practiced in zoo medicine, exotic animal medicine, emergency medicine, dog and cat medicine. She's got such a diversity in all of these areas of veterinary medicine. She has been an American Red Cross authorized instructor for pet CPR and first aid, and a volunteer veterinary medical officer for the National Animal Health Emergency Response Corps. So I am so excited to be able to ask her these questions, not only from our viewers, but that you and I have about pet insurance.
Yeah.
So she is going to be, I think, overwhelmed, Janet, by your questions and my questions, because we have so many. We may have to have her back for a second session.
You know, it's actually like a dinner party talk when you're with people who have pets. Like, do you have pet insurance? No. Do you? Which one do you have? Do you? And even in the vet office, people are talking about it. So
yes. And, you know, as a dermatologist, I didn't get a lot of clients that had pet insurance, but the ones that I did have that I would sign the forms for, they were very happy with it. And it wasn't just one company. It was, you know, several different companies. But in my opinion, and we'll ask Dr. Wilkerson this, when it seems to really come in to help is, God forbid, when your pet is hit by a car or has to have some expensive total hip replacement, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we want to quiz her about that. And also from some of her information from her website, I was looking at, you can get an accident only policy, but you have to clarify with that company what is an accident. So,
wow,
so this is going to be enlightening for all of us.
Great.
Hi, Dr. Wilkerson. So welcome, Dr. Wilkerson. We have so many questions to ask you. Janet and I were talking about all the questions that we get. And then when Janet's friends find out I'm a vet, she comes to ask me about pet insurance, of which I know nothing. So we can't wait to hit you with all these questions. Janet, why don't you start?
Okay. So what is pet insurance?
Okay. So in a nutshell, and you'll hear it called pet insurance or pet health insurance, dog insurance, cat insurance. It's all the same thing. So that's all of it in a nutshell. And then basically think of it as it's like human health insurance, but for pets. So it'll cover illnesses, accidents, things that will happen to your pet when they go to the vet and they get treatment. There are some plans that will actually add on wellness care, and it's not part of the insurance. It's a separate add-on that you will actually, it's more like a schedule or a benefit schedule where they will pay a certain amount a year for certain wellness things. So certain amount for vaccinations a year, a certain amount for dental cleanings, a certain amount for the routine exam. But that's separate and something that you would have to add on. But the basic part of pet insurance is really just coverage for accident and illness in a nutshell. And there are some similarities to human insurance in that there's premiums, there's co-pays, there are deductibles, so very similar to human health insurance. The differences come in is there are no networks, so you can see any vet that you want. There are in human health insurance, pre-existing conditions are covered because of the Affordable Health Care Act.
Mhm.
In pet insurance, pre-existing conditions are not covered. Yeah, they're not covered.
I've run into that. I've run into in
Mm,
dermatology when some of the claims were turned down because, well, this patient is allergic, and it's, you can't really determine that before they're a couple of years old.
right.
And so, I felt sorry for those people because a lot of times they get that insurance for genetic conditions such as allergy that don't show up till later on.
Exactly. Yeah. A big, I will say every pet insurance company that I have on my side, which is the majority, which is pretty much all of them, they will consider signs and symptoms pre-existing. So in
Okay,
your
good
case,
to know.
if it's noted that the animal was scratching and before they got the policy, and then later on after the policy effective date and after the waiting periods, they had, like flea allergy or food allergy, it's possible that they will say, well, they were scratching, even though it could have been something else, so we're not going to cover it in this situation. So people really need to be aware that signs and symptoms can be used to determine pre-existing conditions.
And that's really sad because in my area, they could have had scabies. They
Exactly.
could have had
Yeah.
scabies, and then 2 years later, maybe had flea allergy, and that's now interpreted as allergy. And how sad is
That's
that?
one of the big things about pet insurance that can happen. And it's the underwriter. A lot of times it's the underwriter who has the final say. As a vet, we can, refute it and write letters and things like that. But
Yeah.
um, it really comes down to what the underwriter believes.
So as a pet owner, when's the best time to get pet insurance?
I would say, as a pet owner, as early as possible, so that your
Okay.
pre-existing conditions is as little as possible, right? You want as little of that as
Yeah.
possible because that's an area that they will use to deny claims. I mean, that's just how it is. So obviously, the earlier the better.
My friend Anne adopted those senior dogs,
Right.
right? And she didn't know what the pre-existing conditions. They came with no medical records,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Yeah, that's a
And
good
they had
question.
major issues. So
Yeah.
they were, one was like 8 years old, the other one was 10. So I guess when she adopted them is when she would have gotten pet insurance, right?
Yeah. Well, if she was how old? They were 8 and 10. And I guess it
Yeah.
really depends on the pet insurance company how they're going to cover older dogs, especially if they don't
Right.
have any medical history. That's going to,
Very tricky.
yeah, that's a little tricky, especially for the pet insurance company to determine if anything is pre-existing. Yeah, because that's what they use.
So how do you know, like, which one do you pick? And your site is so comprehensive. It's just
It's fabulous.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
We'll
like
have a
one-stop
link to that.
shopping,
Yeah,
you
we'll
know?
have a link to that at the end of the podcast,
thank
by
you
the
for
way.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, how do you know which one to pick? That's the question, right? How do you know? Because there's so many. There's 20 plus companies. When I started,
Yeah.
they weren't as many, and it just kind of blew up. Really is an individual decision, and that's really all I can say. No one can really pick it for you, even though there's tons of quote engines out there. You really have to dive in. Every pet insurance is as different as night and day, right? If we were going to do car insurance, you could say, oh, here are the top three. They pretty much cover all the same things. Go on price, right? Just go on price.
Yeah.
Pet
Yeah.
insurance, you can't go on price. You really have to dive in and see what the policies cover for your particular situation, your pet's issues, where you live, right? Because urban areas are much more costly than rural areas. You want to make sure the
Mhm.
plan can cover what I call your worst case scenario costs, right? And that's going to be different, rural versus urban. So it's so individual. I can't say which one to pick. It's such an individual decision. There's so many factors that go into it.
With this pre-existing condition thing, I'm getting back to this because a lot of our listeners are
Mm,
rescuers. And
mm.
so when pre-existing conditions is determined, is that determined, Dr. Wilkerson, by their former vet in what's in those records?
Yes, yes. That's what's mainly used is what's in the records. And a lot of times we don't get diagnoses for every, and you might write down something in the history like the owner says, yeah, he was scratching or he was limping, right? That's a symptom or a sign that could be used to denote pre-existing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So because I'm not in the insurance business and a lot of people aren't, what is an underwriter?
Most of the companies, except for a few, are really kind of like storefronts for actual insurance companies that they're not like Nationwide or Lemonade or those big guys in front. They're what's called the underwriter. They are basically financially responsible for paying out. So when you see a name, it may not be, that's not the underwriter, right? The underwriter is going to be in the small print on the website down at the bottom of who's actually covering the costs and who's at financial risk here.
Why is there a waiting period?
Why or what?
Yeah, why? Like if I sign a contract today for my pet, what's the use of a waiting? I don't understand that.
I think the pet insurance is using that to prevent people from signing up for things and they had something happen right before they signed up. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah.
So it kind of gives you a little space to be like, okay, let's make sure you guys are not trying to fraud them, I guess. Or
like I found out yesterday, my dog needs a total hip, and so I'm going to quick sign up for pet insurance.
Exactly.
And I got you.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, did you know that Blue Buffalo makes prescription diets that are formulated by animal nutritionists and veterinarians? And they're used for dietary needs such as kidney support, gastrointestinal support, weight management, and our favorite, allergy and skin problems. They make a food allergic diet that's an alligator-based called NP or a hydrolyzed salmon-based for dogs and cats called HF. So please ask your veterinarian about Blue Buffalo prescription diets.
So in your tips on the right insurance company to pick, you put pays claims in a timely fashion. So how does somebody know that?
See, you're asking really great questions. How would someone know that? Really, all you can ask them. You can always ask. They're going to tell you what they're going to tell you, right? But honestly, looking at reviews of other customers' experiences will kind of give you an idea of how things are going to go, right? Okay. That's a really good way. And then use different sites to do that, right? You've got Yelp, you've got Google reviews, you've got Better Business Bureau, you've got, a lot of different places. And then look for the things that are common between the complaints or common between what's good. Because you might get someone on there who's just upset about something and that's a one-off thing, but look about the common complaints, the common good things, and that'll give you more of an idea of what's going on. But how do you know how they're going to pay out?
That's a really good answer. So there's exclusions and requirements in an insurance policy.
Yeah, that's right.
And exclusions are what they're not going to cover.
Exactly.
Right? So you
like
have to
what
look
are
at
some examples of those? I'm just curious. Exclusions.
Let me just see, because it varies between companies. Sometimes they won't cover dental. They won't cover pregnancy or breeding. They won't cover if some bilateral conditions, and we can talk about that at some point. So it'll vary, but usually should be a section in the policy, and pretty much all the companies have sample policies that you can read through, and then you just go to the exclusion section. But they'll have it on their website, say we don't cover this, but go into the policy, really dive in there. That's where all the gold is, and all the things are. Yeah.
What's a bilateral condition?
I knew that was coming.
I know what bilateral means, but give me an example of a bilateral. Like I had joint pain on both sides.
Right.
So, anyway.
So when I first started, it was really interesting. And I don't know if you feel the same way, Alice. When I heard that term, I felt like this is an insurance term, because I understand that there are conditions that can happen bilaterally. But I feel that what they mean is conditions that have a higher probability of happening on the other side. So things like a cruciate rupture, if you have it on one side, more than likely it's going to happen on the other side. Primary glaucoma in dogs is usually, if it happens on one side, it can more than likely, literature has shown it happens on the other side. But here is where I'm a little concerned about how they use this term. They don't always clearly define this term. They'll say any condition that can happen on both sides of the body. And I'm like, well, that's pretty much any condition except
Because we're even.
exactly. So please be clear about which conditions fall under this exclusion. And some companies do a good job at that. They'll say bilateral conditions only applies to knees and hips, right? But I've seen some that will say lameness, and it's like, really?
Well, does bilateral mean also therapy, like for cancer? Say they have osteosarcoma, bone cancer, and they have the leg removed. Then, so if it pays for that, will it also pay for the subsequent chemotherapy? I mean, you can use bilateral in other ways.
Exactly. See, that's the point with that word. Let me just be clear about bilateral. What they're saying is, if your dog had a cruciate issue, let's just say cruciate. If your dog had a cruciate issue.
Wait, cruciate, give us
I'm
give
sorry.
an example.
ACL tear? Does that? Okay. So if your dog had an ACL tear before you signed up, or during the waiting period, they will not cover that because that's pre-existing, but they also won't cover the other leg.
Right.
Now, if that happens,
because they put, right.
So that's considered pre-existing exclusion. So both legs are not covered. So that's to be clear.
I was just saying, your website, you also mentioned some accidents aren't covered either. So I'd like you to define that.
No, but you can get accident-only policies, I think.
Yes.
But it doesn't cover all accidents.
Well, you have to be really clear on what the company feels is an accident. Because what a pet owner feels is an accident may not be what the pet insurance company thinks is an accident. So an owner may think an ACL tear is an accident because it's just like all of a sudden it's fine and rip, boom. Pet insurance company, no. So every company is different on what they feel is an accident. So if you get an accident-only policy, read the policy to see what is actually covered.
Wow.
Yeah.
Will they actually list things like hit by car, fall off a table, someone dropped the dog? Will they list examples? Or
they'll list examples, but they won't be all inclusive. Where I would go is to the exclusions. What is not covered? Yeah. What do they actually say is not covered?
Wow.
And then you want to be careful that you're buying insurance in the state where you live, but like Alice lives in Ohio and Florida. So you want the insurance to cover, right? You'd want it to cover both.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I never thought about that either. People who have...
Yeah. I thought it was just nationwide. Not to plug nationwide, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, that's a good question. Most companies will cover if you are traveling somewhere else. You can see any vet in the U.S. That is something that goes across the board.
Good to know. Because we had actually, my husband, he was going on a company and they had this Kinetic, I live in Connecticut, Kinetic Cares insurance. And we didn't go on it because our kids were living in different states at college. And it only covered you if you were in the state of Connecticut. And I'm like, that's ridiculous.
Oh, wow.
So well, that's good to know that Dr. Wilkerson mentioned that it's, U.S. wide, United States wide, all states.
Yeah, there are some that will cover you when you're traveling, like in Canada or U.S. territories, or some it's worldwide. So different policies handle it differently, but everyone will cover you if you're in another state. Like you can see any vets in the U.S. Yeah.
So how did you get into this?
Good question.
It's much needed, by the way. It's much needed. Yeah.
When I started doing this, it was about 2008 where my clients at the time were asking me questions about pet insurance. And I was like, I don't know. And I don't want to read to you from a brochure that's a marketing piece, right? So it was very important for me to give my clients very good information, so they can make an informed decision for themselves. I started doing research and I started finding things where I'm like, whoa, I was like, this doesn't make any sense from a veterinary standpoint. What you're not covering doesn't make any sense to me. Back then, it's not now, but I keep it on my list of things to make sure you have, back then, they did not cover chronic conditions after the first year. And then I'm thinking, Well, that's not right.
That doesn't even make sense.
It's chronic.
Right.
It's going to keep happening.
Ongoing.
You only get it for a year. You only get to subscribe to that
Yeah,
chronic condition.
No,
for
and
1 year.
that's the perfect definition of atopy in the dog, of allergy. They have it sometimes during the first year, and it gets worse as they get older.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, that's horrible.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was like, I need to let people, I was just like, let me just talk about the gotchas. Let me help people navigate this so they don't end up in a bad situation. So, and I was like, well, the best place to do that is just put it on the web. At the time, the web was new and exciting, and but it was to put it on the web so that everybody had access to it. I just wanted people to be able to make informed decisions. Not everybody can read the medical terminology in the policy and understand some of the little things that we can, Alice, you and I, and so I thought it was just, a good idea to help people, and that's really just to be an advocate.
That's fantastic. What a gift, because as a pet owner, and I don't know, insurance not that great, it's helpful.
Well, and when you started this in 2008, you probably didn't have that many companies that you had to review compared to now.
No, compared to now, no, there weren't that many, and it was just starting up, right? It was just getting that rolling. And I think before then, you had VPI, which was an OG. Like, they've been around for, it's nationwide now. Nationwide bought them, but back in the day, VPI was one of the first. So, but yeah, over time, more and more players got into the game, and now there's I think back then there were 10 maybe, and now there's 20 plus.
The other thing that I've discovered, kind of similar to human medicine, is the coding. Now, for example, I had a patient with skin lymphoma. The term is epitheliotropic lymphoma. Okay, so I filled out their insurance form for that. It was rejected. They had no code for that. And skin lymphoma is not uncommon. And so they would not pay for that. So I called the company, and apparently they had vet techs reviewing it. And to be honest, some vet techs have not experienced skin lymphoma. Really, they haven't. So I called the company and I said, listen, this is a not uncommon skin disease, especially in golden retrievers. And so I'm not sure what happened after that, if they added it to their list of categories. But it bothered me because I thought, wow, is this going to develop like in human medicine? If you didn't code it right, you don't get paid for it. So that was my only bad experience that I've experienced with pet insurance. And that was maybe 5 years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I'm not, did this company have a benefit schedule? Was it like a schedule type, like they pay for specific things that are on a list? Because
well, that could be too. That could have been, yeah.
Yeah, because I'm interested. That's a very interesting thing, because I'm wondering, like, for a company that doesn't use a list like that, what would the people reviewing it think, right? Like, if they hadn't heard about it, would they be like,
right? Yeah, it's tossed out.
Yeah.
The other thing is, like, for example, we use CCNU, a human drug for that, which we don't stock. So I script it out. I write a prescription. Now, I doubt the insurance company, the pet insurance company, would cover that. Correct?
What, if you script something out to a pharmacist?
Yeah. And then the people pay for it and turn their receipt in. Because let's face it, Dr. Wilkerson, you and I know there aren't a lot of FDA-approved veterinary drugs. I mean, we use a lot of human drugs in the course of veterinary medicine. Yeah,
I have. That's a really good question. A lot of them will say we will cover. Some companies don't cover prescription, but the ones that do will usually say we will cover them that are prescribed by your veterinarian. But some do say that they are approved by the FDA. So I haven't really heard a lot of complaints about people's prescriptions not being fulfilled if they weren't approved for use in animals. But that is a good question. I am going to look into that.
So how, on average, say I have a puppy, new puppy, I don't know, 3 months old, on average, like, what's the cost of pet insurance?
Oh, that's a good question, Janet.
Like a range for good coverage.
For good coverage.
Not like concierge level.
For a puppy, it's going to be somewhat low. You're talking probably $30 to $40 per month, maybe less for a puppy. But do realize that over time, that is going to increase as they age. Yes. There is a company that says that they do not increase the premium based on age, but they increase it based on other factors. So you do expect for that premium to increase. And that's one of the issues, or there's two big complaints: pre-existing conditions not being covered, or things not being covered because they're deemed pre-existing due to signs and symptoms. But the other is rising premiums. So that is the other complaint. And unexpected hits, like unexpected rises, like not like 10, 20%. Some people are being hit with 50, 40 unexpectedly, right? So I'm not saying it happens all the time, but it is something to be aware of. And I always tell people, when you're getting a policy, call the company, ask them how much and when and by how much your premium can increase over the lifespan of your animal. Because that kind of then you're kind of holding them accountable a little bit to keep it reasonable, right?
I track like all our expenses, our household expenses, and we have 3 animals. And on average, if there are no issues, no one's had we have 2 cats and a dog. No one's had any issues. It's a good year just for basic, the annual physical, whatever it's called when you go. And maybe
vaccines.
What is it?
And vaccines.
And then maybe there's one thing you have to go and have something checked during the year. On average, we spend about $1,000 a year per pet. So as a consumer, I'm going to look at what are my premiums, right? And what is that covering? But I think it's something pet owners should kind of look at. What are you spending on your pet? And how is this insurance going to benefit you? Quite frankly, we had a dog that had cancer. I think in that case, if I had had cancer coverage, I wish I would have had pet insurance, right?
Yes, I think the best, me personally, this is just my opinion, the best way to use pet insurance is how insurance is, as a financial instrument, how insurance is meant to be used, which is to help offset a catastrophic hit, right? Things that you can budget for, like wellness exams, or just, that really isn't necessarily the best way to use insurance per se. A lot of people are like, oh, insurance is going to save me money. Well, it may not. Like, you may pay over time more than you get back. So you have to be okay with that, and just use it as, hey, if there's a catastrophic hit, I'm not going to be financially underwater because of it, because of the hit. So that's how I tell people to think about insurance, not to say, because it may not save you money in the long run if your pet stays relatively healthy, right?
It's the risk. You have to assess the risk. But what if you really can't afford pet insurance? What's your advice there? What do you do?
And understandable, like, it can be expensive, right? Especially if premiums increase over time. How do you budget for that if they come out of the blue? I would say for people, and I do have some alternatives on my site. There are things like, I don't know if Care Credit is still around, but things like Care Credit, right? I don't know how much those interest rates are, but that's an option to help you spread it out over time. There are some financial assistance programs that I have listed on my site that can help people in financial, that can't financially afford the care. But they're really, maybe the vets can work out payment plans, and have some kind of service like that too as well.
I'm surprised that kind of HMOs with, Dr. Wilkerson, with all the corporate purchasing of practices that's going on now, I'm really surprised that none of them have broached that yet. Like, if you go to, let's say VCA, let's just take them as an example, or Blue Pearl. If you come to our Blue Pearl clinics, we can offer you this financial plan. But to my knowledge, I don't think any of them have those.
Not to mine either. I don't know if they do. I've never heard of it. It's possible, but I've not heard of it.
And I want to ask you too about deductibles. In your opinion, what is like the average deductible? Say I had to have a total hip on my dog, and the insurance company is going to cover it because it wasn't pre-existing. I've had the insurance since they were a puppy. Is it like $1,000? I mean, what's an example of an average deductible?
Most companies give you a range to choose from. So you can actually choose what deductible you want, and it can range from like 100 to 1,000, right? Depending on the company, but it can range somewhere in there. So you get to choose. Just know the lower the deductible, the cheaper the premium. I mean, let me think about this. The higher the premium.
I know what you're saying.
I have to think. And the higher the deductible, the lower the premium. So you're paying more out of pocket, but your premium is less.
Yeah. Like house insurance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like human medicine. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Dr. Wilkerson, tell us about your pets.
I've had many pets over the years. I am down to a cockatiel now, named Sydney.
Cool.
Yeah. But yeah, I've had, all of my pets have been, as probably Alice, all of them have been,
something wrong with them.
Exactly. Either they were left behind, right? Yeah. And it's but yeah, I've had so many. I'm just thinking like memory, so many. But yeah, I'm down to a cockatiel, and I'm like, okay, it's time to ramp up again, right? So
yeah.
But I lost my kitty last year, so it was hard. That was hard because she was the best, and so it's taken me a little bit, So I'm gonna just spend all my time with Sydney and give him what I can.
What was the relationship between the cockatiel and the cat?
I was thinking that too.
There was none because I kept them. Yeah, my cat would. I've had cats in the past because this cockatiel is about 33 years old. And so I've had other cats and they were fine, but this one was like, you could just see the stalking and she wasn't always in control of herself. And so she would just, I didn't even want to know what would happen. So they were relationship. When I was doing my internship, he came in and because the clients had, they were syringe feeding him, but the formula was too hot. So it burned his, it burned his esophagus and crop. And so they were like, we can't afford to fix it. And I'm like, I'll take him. I'll take him. I'll fix it, So
was he okay after that?
Yeah, he did really, really well. It took a little bit for it to heal, but yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, they're all all my pets are kind of like that. I'll take them.
Well, our dog, when we got our dog, which Alice found, Libby is a golden retriever rescue. She escaped a puppy mill and got hit by a car, and Dr. Bay fixed her hip, did that femur thing. But I went to Ohio State, as did Alice. And so I got to take her to the vet the first time, and they said, well, what is her full name? And I'm like, well, it's Libby of Buckeye.
Did they get it, though? Because you're in Connecticut. When you're up there, people are, always...
Nobody knows what I'm talking about. But I felt it was very like Libby of Manchester. So that's her real name, and my husband hates it.
Well, I'm going to have to look up because... Dr. Wilkerson, one of my Goldens is a China Rescue, and from China Rescue Dogs, and she came with her history all in Mandarin, and she has a Mandarin name, but I
have someone that can read that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, Janet. I'll have to get it out of my file cabinet. And then the other Golden I have was a mill mama, and she was already named Annie, so we kept her Annie. But we named the China dog Gidget because I just. I loved, and I wanted to name Annie Frances because if you remember on the Gidget TV show, her real name was Frances.
That's true.
But I didn't. Yeah, I didn't want to change it. So
now, Dr. Wilkerson, I'm going to ask you our guest question. Yeah. What is your pet peeve? It can be human
or human peeve, right?
That's so broad. Like what is my pet
Just lay it out there.
It could be anything like people that don't use turn signals. I mean, that's, some examples. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my.
Gotta be something that burns
There's
you
a
out.
lot of things. I'm just trying to, I think people who cut me off the road, definitely. Because I'm just always feeling like my life, you just put my life in danger. Like, you don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they don't. They don't even look back.
No. And the people behind me.
I have to be like, okay, maybe they're racing to get somewhere important to try to calm myself down. But that's a big pet peeve. They're aggressive, right? If you give a little inch between you and someone else, they'll get in there.
Yeah.
Have you driven in Massachusetts?
I've heard Boston is challenging.
all of it, and they're called, this is terrible, they're called mass bills.
Well,
I'm not
wait a minute.
kidding. You go, "There's a mass
Yeah,
bill."
but Janet, Florida driving, let me tell you, first of all,
Oh.
everyone's old
Geezer.
or they don't have a license. Okay. So, and it's 8 lanes and everybody speeds through a yellow light because if you get
Yep.
stuck at the light, it's like 5 minutes. So here
Yep.
comes the yellow light. Yeah.
And you see this much of them
It's
over
scary.
in the window.
Very scary. My favorite though is when they drive on the walk only path. And I just go, there's another one.
Extra credit. Well, Dr. Wilkerson, this has been so helpful, and we'll be sure and share your site with our audience.
Thank you.
Because it's invaluable.
Yeah.
It is just
I thank you for starting that site because I'm telling you, when someone would ask me about pet insurance, I didn't mean to be like, but I was
Right.
because now there's so many companies too that I can't imagine it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, it takes me a while. Like I try to update at least every 6 months, and it does take some time. It takes some time to make sure.
Before we go though, I wanted to ask you what happened that Nationwide dropped some clients. What happened there?
That's
Just a financial thing?
That's a big deal. No one really knows, but you can read. There's some people who have some insider information, and you can read their journal or their articles, and it just feels like I think those policies weren't making them money, and it was costing them money, and so that's a big hit. Like no one expected that in the pet insurance.
Right.
That's a big deal
Yeah.
because it puts everybody a little like, can this happen to me? Because those people now cannot get another policy without what they had during Nationwide will be considered pre-existing, right? So
That's
if
right.
they go to another
Wow.
company, they're not going to cover any of those conditions. So I mean, that
Right.
was a big deal.
And one more thing, when I went to Bark in the Park, which was a big fundraiser in different booths, Medical Mutual of Ohio was there. And I kind of said to the lady, well, what are you doing here? It's human. And she said, but we offer pet insurance on some of our policies. Did you know that, Dr. Wilkerson? I did not know that.
No, I did not know that.
And she said, I said, maybe I have that. She said, well, when you go home, check under personal, and it wasn't there. But yeah, apparently that company does offer some policies for pets.
So
Which
I would just make sure, like some insurance companies like Allstate, Geico, they will actually use an existing pet insurance company to use their system and then just present it to their client. So
I see.
So
Right.
yeah, I would just look at the
With
bottom
a different
of the
carrier.
Yeah, just look at the bottom of the website to see who's
Interesting.
doing
Okay.
what.
Actually, some large corporations, and I don't have the names of them right now, are offering pet insurance to their employees.
Oh yeah, it's been known as a benefit, one of the HR benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
Well,
Just
and-
make sure the policy is right for you, though, right? Just because they're offering so and so doesn't mean that it has everything you need. So just
Yeah, that's true.
don't just take it
That's a good
because
point.
make sure it works for you.
This has been so
Yes, thank
informative.
you
I
so
learned a lot.
much.
Now I'm going to
You
look at
guys are
policies.
blessed. Love it.
Well,
Hang out with you.
I
anytime.
don't know what our producers think, but they edit a lot. Let's just say that,
Yeah.
right, Janet?
They have to.
Well, listen, this is Dr. Alice Novotny-Jeroman and
Janet Novotny King signing off and saying thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us, like us, and do all those good things. Thanks for listening.
thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in today. We hope you learned some valuable information about making decisions about your pet's health.
And don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe on podcasts because we love to have those likes. Thanks so much for listening.
That's actually really good.
Oh,
you
good.
could both go bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
How about woof woof?